I'm Nadia Taylor, Training and Exercise Manager at the Readiness Support Center, and this is Semper Gumby, a podcast about emergency management in the Corps of Engineers. This is our first podcast in what we hope to be a fun and informative series about emergency management in the Corps of Engineers. In future episodes, we'll cover topics about disaster response and recovery, FEMA mission assignments, as well as the Corps-specific response authorities under which we operate for things like flood fighting and coastal emergencies. In today's episode, however, our first episode, we'll cover a basic overview of the Temporary Emergency Power Mission, a response mission assigned to the Corps of Engineers by FEMA under the Stafford Act after a presidentially declared disaster. Got all that? Okay, well today we have with us two of our longtime EM professionals, Dave Bishop and Pete Navesky. Dave, what do you do for the Corps?
I'm the Temporary Emergency Power SME for USACE, and I'm the full-time permanent subject matter expert for the Corps, and I work out of the Great Lakes and Ohio River Division. I also, during an event, work with Task Force Temporary Emergency Power, which is based out of the Pittsburgh district usually. So, I'm the guy that's kind of the voice on the power interagency coordination calls, and I'm always available during disasters.
And also with us we have Pete Navesky. Pete, what do you do with the Corps?
I'm part of what is called the Permanent Cadre of Emergency Support Function Number 3 team leaders. Normally when I go out as the lead USACE representative interacting with FEMA and the state that we're supporting as a result of a disaster, and I become the one door to the Corps for anything they might need from us. But in my youth, I used to be an action officer for the Tulsa District Emergency Power Planning and Response Team. So over the years, I've become the headquarters cadre proponent for the Temporary Emergency Power mission that we execute for FEMA.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is just kind of get a 10,000-foot view of the Temporary Emergency Power mission. So for people who don't know what the mission is, newcomers to the mission, or people who may have taken a course several years ago and perhaps need a refresher, we're just going to give a little overview. So we'll start very basic. In an event, a hurricane, a tornado, an ice storm, some event of some magnitude, and the power goes out, what has actually happened?
Well, typically one of several things may have happened. And a lot of it depends upon the event. Normally, in most cases, power generation plants are still operational, but some component of the transmission system that gets the power from the plants to the communities, or within the communities, what we call the distribution system. The lines that you see when you walk outside your front door and, the telephone poles are, running down the street. Components of that, typically what happens is trees fall down, wind blows them over. If it's an ice storm, the ice breaks the lines. And as a result, power can't get to your homes, it can't get to a facility. And we typically then go in and have to work with the state and FEMA to start to provide temporary emergency power at those facilities that have lost their commercial power grid capability, but they still need those facilities to be able to support response or recovery activities.
Okay, the idea is the power utility is working to get power restored on a widespread level. But the Corps gets involved to provide temporary emergency power only to specific facilities, as you said. We're not turning the power on to my home or your home if you're out of power, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Utility companies normally are not involved with what we call the point source generators, a specific facility. Their goal is to restore the entire grid, get their customers. Basically, a customer to a utility company means a meter, the power meter electric meter that's on your house. And so their goal is to get those people's power restored so that they can charge them for the use of the power.
So when we say temporary emergency power, Dave, that means we are providing generators in a nutshell.
Right.
And so we're providing generators to certain facilities. So what facilities are these, and who decides which facility gets a generator and which doesn't?
The state is the one who decides who gets federal support for generators. They have to give us a prioritized list of what's most important to them. And they usually get their information from county emergency managers. So they start kind of at the bottom level of the government chain, and the counties report upward to the state saying we have this hospital, we have this sewage plant, whatever facilities they have out of power, and they know that from people calling them, asking for help to the county emergency manager. And so the county prepares their list and they send it up to the state. And if the state doesn't have the capability to find somebody else to do it, whether they have their own contractors or they get the National Guard or somebody like that, then they'll go to FEMA and say, we need your support. We need some federal assets to come in and install generators at these facilities. So they have to fall within certain parameters. The state and FEMA won't approve just anybody, like we were saying, with it's a privately owned house or residence. It's not going to happen. It has to be a critical public facility. And there are certain definitions for that have to be followed. So once the state and FEMA say that these are the critical public facilities that qualify, then they prioritize those and they give them to USACE. And at that point, if we have a mission assignment, that's when we go out and start installing generators.
Okay, so what are some examples of these critical, and I know you said critical public facilities, but sometimes other kinds of facilities can be considered critical and receive a generator through the temporary emergency power mission. Is that correct?
It is correct. There have been cases, and they're generally the exception rather than the rule, but there are cases where there are privately owned facilities, for example, gas stations. If one of the strategies of FEMA and the state is to allow people to get out of the area that's been affected by the disaster, people have to have fuel in order to be able to exit their own cars or public transportation or whatever. So there has to be fuel. So they may say that a privately owned gas station is a critical facility, even though it's not a public facility, privately owned.
Yeah, and even at times, for example, a church is typically often used as a shelter. And a church, by definition, is not a public facility. So a lot of times we will provide generators to a church that's being used as a shelter so that it can stay operational and those folks have a place to stay until they're able to go back to their homes.
So these are exceptions rather than the rule. So if we're talking about the rule, quote unquote, facilities that most often get a generator through this mission are those public facilities like fire stations, police stations, water, wastewater treatment plants, those sort of things?
Correct. Typically, those facilities are normally owned and operated by some level of government, either a local municipality, a county, a city, and typically those are the facilities that are providing a lot of the services to the members of the community. And again, it's the response type, it's the life-saving type of services that they provide, or as you get into the water and wastewater systems, the life-sustaining services that they provide.
Okay, so let's jump back a little. Let's say we do have a mission assignment from FEMA. We get a prioritized list of these facilities that need generators. Take me from there to installing the generators to what happens after that. I mean, obviously, we're not giving them generators forever and ever, amen. So what's the process after that?
Briefly, the process is that once we have the request that comes from the state and FEMA, we have the 249th Engineer Battalion go out to the public facility and meet with the owner of the facility and determine what their critical needs are at that building. And we usually, if it's a large facility, we can't power up everything because the generators just have limited capability. So the 249th Engineer Battalion will do what we call a pre-installation inspection of the building with the facility owner, and they would determine just what needs to have power inside that building. And then they put that information into a computer network or into a paper format and send that back to the staging area where we have a planning and response team. And the planning and response team selects a generator that's usually a FEMA-owned generator that we utilize, and we assign our contractor to go out and install the generator at the facility. And And then at that point, the contractor fuels and maintains and operates the generator until the commercial power comes back up.
So all of this is happening after the fact, right? After the event. The power is out widespread. And it sounds like, we all are government workers here. We all know how the process goes, but this takes time. What can we do pre-event that might hasten this process afterwards or provide some more efficiency to the process?
Well, of course, one of the largest time-consuming components of executing an emergency power mission is normally the situation we run into all the time. On day one, the state will give us 35 facilities that they want power restored to. We typically only have about a dozen 249th assessment teams or pre-installation inspection teams. And then where those teams are located versus where the facilities are located, it could potentially take a team all day just to get to one facility, get the information back to the staging area before they could then go on to the next facility on their list. So distances involved create issues, and one of the things that we have been trying to foster for the past several years is having facility owners put their assessment information, which they can do on their own using electrical engineers, certified or licensed electricians, and that data then resides on a website where we can access it.
By the way, the website Pete is talking about here is called EPAAT, for Emergency Power Facilities Assessment Tool. EPAAT provides an off-site repository for facility assessment data. Information is actually entered by facility owners or managers, and then that data is available to the Corps in the event of a presidential disaster declaration that results in a temporary emergency power mission assignment from FEMA.
Now, instead of the time that it takes to get an assessment team from the 249th to that facility, if we have a generator that meets that need, we can assign that generator to that facility and have our contractor deploy it. And so at times we can take a full day to, in some cases, several days off the time period it would take to get a generator installed to that facility and get that facility back operational again.
Okay, so assuming there are several variables, what is an overview of a timeline for the power mission from event to all the generators are back and accounted for?
You have to categorize the event. The types of events would be anything from an ice storm, which is a no-notice event, usually, have very little warning that's going to happen, and it's usually localized, to something like a hurricane or a major earthquake that covers a very large area. And you have, not in the case of an earthquake, you don't have warning, but for a hurricane, you have more warning. So the response time varies because the time that it takes for people to mobilize from their district, the Corps of Engineers folks and the 249th, if they're there pre-event, in the case of a hurricane, they're ready to start as soon as possible after the hurricane hits. So, but the rule of thumb is that if it's a no-notice event, it's going to take 24 to 48 hours for our folks to get on site and have our contractor on site and everybody ready to go. Then it's going to be another probably 24 to 48 hours before we get the first generator installed. So that's kind of a timeline at the beginning. And of course, we ramp up generally. It takes the state a while to determine where they want generators installed. So there are many times that we get there and we're on site and we're still waiting for them to tell us where they need generators installed. But once we have that information, it ramps up. It's kind of a bell curve. Installs start slowly at first, but ramp up rapidly until we're installing anywhere from 25 to 30 generators a day at some point. But usually power missions don't go beyond 30 days. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. There have been exceptions. Katrina, Sandy, some of the larger events will go beyond that, up to 45 days or so. But temporary emergency power is a response mission. It's not a recovery mission like blue roofs or debris removal. So generally we're in early and we're out quickly.
One last thing, you mentioned the planning and response team, and if any of our PRT, for short, PRT members are listening to this, and this might be their first power mission that they are going to, what is an important or the bigger takeaways or things that they need to know as a PRT member heading out to a power mission?
One of the biggest things would be, and hopefully through their training, and if they have actually paid attention to the standard operating procedure for the temporary emergency power mission, would be, what am I supposed to be doing once I get out there? Some positions, that's fairly straightforward. When you're a quality assurance representative and you're going on your daily tours of the generators to verify their operational status, verify their condition, that's kind of a fairly simple type of job duty. When you're the action officer working with the state, the requirements you have to do are fairly straightforward, but you end up having to put your personal interaction skills to the test because you're dealing with a lot of different personalities. It can be a little bit of a stressful environment because everyone expects everything yesterday. Mission managers have I won't say a daunting task, but they can have an exciting task because they're trying to ensure the mission execution flows smoothly. So they're working with every component of the power team. The 249, the ACI contractor, the action officer, the district that we're supporting. We always joke about if you've been to one FEMA disaster, you've been to one FEMA disaster. Well, even on the power mission, that applies. If you have a good basic understanding of what you're expected to do, then once you get there, depending upon how stressful the situation may be, those activities will flow. It's just putting them into practice and putting them into play when you're out there.
And I would say that the important things for a PRT member to know when they're deploying is that, first of all, Pete alluded to the SOP manual. Knowing what the standard operating procedures are, it's all documented. Knowing what your particular role and your responsibilities are for your position, whatever it is on the team. The other thing to remember is that you're not alone. It's a team effort. We've got people there that do have experience. Even if they're not on your team, your PRT, you've got the 249th Engineer Battalion that's there, and they always have experienced people who've been to disasters before. And they not only know their roles, but they know a lot of the PRT roles also. And then the ACI contractors, they usually have senior people who've deployed also. And, you have to establish trust with them and know that it's a team and pull information, and approach them, work hand in hand with them, ask them for advice, and, not feel like you're alone and that you have to know how to do everything. There are people out there that are going to help you. And of course, the subject matter experts like myself and the other 9 volunteer SMEs that we have are a phone call away. So anything that comes up, you have somebody that's there to help you.
That's all we have for today's episode. We want to thank Pete Navesky and Dave Bishop for being here on our little pilot podcast, and we want to thank you for joining us on our podcast journey. We hope you've learned something and that you subscribe to our feed and check back to our website, rsc.usace.army.mil, for more episodes in the future. Thanks for joining us on Semper Gumby, a podcast about emergency management in the Corps of Engineers.